This podcast is the design of City Sites Urban Media, and our goal is to bring into focus the difference between culture and God's ideas found in His Word. To learn more, go to citysitesurbanmedia.com.
I don't plan on being homeless forever.
I would say the majority of people that are homeless are not homeless. They're mentally ill / drug addicts.
Connection between those who are homeless and drug abusers, it has a direct correlation in a sense.
Tonight, they're the images alarming Californians. In LA, the homeless on places like the Hollywood Walk of Fame and along the iconic Venice Boardwalk.
Any and everywhere you go, in and out of stores, homeless, homeless, homeless.
What was once largely confined to the city's notorious Skid Row can now be seen all across Los Angeles. Hundreds of homeless encampments have sprung up, including this one in the shadow of City Hall.
How many homeless encampments are you seeing now in Los Angeles?
A little shy of 700.
Mayor Eric Garcetti calls it a crisis. Authorities here spent over $600 million on the issue last year and have more than doubled the number of people housed since 2015. But they have failed to keep pace with demand.
If you're a woman on Skid Row, it's not a question of if you're going to get sexually assaulted. You will be sexually or physically assaulted. What happens when a woman gets sexually assaulted? What happens to her soul, her self-esteem, her mental health? And think about that happening over and over again the longer you leave somebody on the streets. All the other ingredients of homelessness, domestic abuse, alcohol and drug addiction, unemployment, those have remained constant, but the skyrocketing rents that have hit have just pushed us past the tipping point, dropping so many people onto the streets. We have to place people with services. And people say, oh, people are service resistant. Well, we don't experience that here. We are over capacity. We have people knocking down the door trying to get in simply because we welcome people and embrace them with the compassion of Christ. That's the change that needs to happen.
This is the City Sites Podcast with Larry Kutzler.
Homelessness is an issue for every community in America today. With skyrocketing costs of housing, people are losing the battle of having a place to live. The streets are full of people who are marginalized. They include the working poor, those with mental illness, those who have addictions to alcohol and drugs, and there are those who have just plainly given up. I have watched a news report recently where the reporter told the audience that people coming from foreign countries were amazed at all the homelessness in the richest country on earth. That's a troubling dilemma. And how can we as a nation spend trillions of dollars in Washington and have the crisis of homelessness in our cities? What is happening to the compassion of our country that allows for homelessness to exist and increase to where it is now out of control in many cities across the land? Today I talk with a man who has worked hard to bring relief and hope to those who call the streets home. Ken Peterson has been a pastor, was the former CEO of the Union Gospel Mission in St. Paul, Minnesota, and now is a regional coordinator for Citygate Network, an organization that helps ministries around the country be more effective in their work surrounding homelessness. Ken, I'm really interested in the idea of rescue missions. Now, I think that term is sort of antiquated, right?
That's correct. The rescue mission term is something that started in like 1880s in New York City at the Bowery Rescue Mission.
Oh, that's right.
Yep, Water Street Mission, Bowery Mission. There were probably about 12 missions in New York in the 1880s, and it spread throughout the country. Rescue was rescuing people from the streets, from alcoholism, from poverty, from hunger and homelessness, bringing them into a gospel mission, pretty much storefront operations, and get them off the cold, hard, mean streets, give them food, clothing, and try to save their life through the preaching of the gospel.
Wasn't there a tagline to all of that? Soup, soap, and
soap, and salvation was the 3 S's that the movement used for probably 100 years.
And it grew quite large, though, right?
Oh, yeah. There's missions have spread all across the country. Major metropolitan areas can have several missions, small and large large missions. Small towns are popping up, rescue missions, rural areas. Our organization, Citygate Network, we have about 280 to 300 missions in our organization, but there are probably another 300 missions across the country that don't belong to our network. And right now across America, there are Christian ministries popping up in churches, nonprofit agencies that are doing what rescue missions have done for 125 years. They're realizing the need, and they're starting to feed people and house people and train people and bring people into recovery. So our network, Citygate Network, we've broadened our tent. So some of these new Christian nonprofits that do what the rescue mission has always done can fit into our organization.
However, when a rescue mission starts, I know the one that we have in St. Paul, the Union Gospel Mission, that was a coalition of churches initially, correct? Is that how they all get started?
That's pretty much the way it is, yeah. The name Union was widely used at the turn of the century because it was a unity of evangelical churches coming together to address the needs of street people, the homeless people, people living in the hobo camps down by the tracks and the river. So there was a unity of purpose and to provide finances and personnel and combined vision, the churches came together and made a unity. That's changed, however, now. There's an organic movement taking place throughout the country, small towns and big towns. People that have been touched by God, they're sitting in your churches and they're hearing the gospel preached and they're seeing the homeless, people in poverty, people in addiction, people wandering on the streets, don't have a place to stay. God is touching their hearts and they're stepping up to the plate and starting missions.
So the mission itself, the old tagline, which is really what they did, soup, soap, and salvation, how has that changed? Are they still doing soup, soap, and salvation, or is it different?
Pretty much still doing the 3 levels of emergency services: food, shelter, and clothing. However, the majority of missions are really emphasized, and then they have all along, our goal is to deal with the immediate physical needs, but our main goal is to deal with the spiritual needs, emotional needs, educational needs, and social needs of clients that come in. Our role is to get them out of homelessness through the transformation power of the gospel. Most of the missions across the country, they will have residential programs where a person that comes out of the emergency shelter can go into a residential program. While they're in there, expectations are put upon them. They have to attend some type of Bible study, church service, some type of spiritual discipline. A lot of the missions will have life skills classes, basic adult education, AA programs, or similar biblically based recovery programs. Some of the larger missions have dental clinics, medical clinics, and the big thing going on right now is collaborate not only with other Christian agencies, but secular organizations, the medical community, dental community, mental health community. And right now the mission movement is becoming quite sophisticated in large urban areas: Houston, Minneapolis, Seattle, Los Angeles, Dallas. We want to collaborate with any organization that cares about the hungry, the homeless, the abused, and the addicted without giving up the gospel truth. The Cherry Street Mission in, I think it's Dayton, Ohio, they bought an old junior high school. And in that junior high school building, they have a mission where they food, shelter, and clothing for people, but they also have brought in a vocational technical school that has set up a state-of-the-art machine shop to teach the homeless guys and women that want to learn a trade to come in. That's totally funded and run by the vocational school. The mission provides the building, and they invite other organizations to come in. A lot of the missions have culinary art schools where you train people to go into the food service. And the missions realize, as a Christian nonprofit, they don't have the resources to fund all those other programs, but they're inviting the community to come in and help them. It's a phenomenal thing. There are several missions around the country that take up several city blocks with housing, food, shelter, clothing, dental, medical, vocational training, recovery service. It's really cool to see.
And you're saying that these folks are coming in with their expertise, whatever educational expertise they have. They don't mind working with a gospel association or a gospel mission that actually talks about salvation. Because sometimes, especially secular organizations, they don't want to get close to anyone that is doing that kind of work.
Some of that suspicion and division has been broken down.
Really?
By strong, progressive leaders of the missions that realize the homeless population is not the mission's problem, it's the community's problem.
That's
and
true.
For 100 years, the mission has been footing the bill.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to get the community to involve. Mm-hmm. So most of the missions, if they collaborate with other organizations, secular organizations, educational organizations, even liberal Christian organizations, there's always a memorandum of understanding or a policy agreement that if you come in and help us, you won't work to compromise or undercut our gospel belief. We'll let you come in and bring your expertise in and be the trade school leader. We won't interfere with what you're doing, but you'll respect our core values as a mission while you're here. And people are realizing that that's the only way really to address the epidemic of homelessness.
You know, it's interesting. I was out on the West Coast a couple months ago, and I was amazed at how many homeless people we encountered. And they were everywhere. It wasn't just one section of the community they were living in. They were all over. And yet I kept wondering, you know, if it's a community problem, why isn't the community kind of dealing with it? Maybe it's so overwhelming, but it was driven, according to what I understand, by the economics. It costs so much to live today, to have, you know, an apartment and whatever. So what do you think is going on, especially in the West Coast?
Well, I think, number one, the situation on the West Coast is predominant because the West Coast, people like the weather out there and people migrate there.
Sure. Well,
because it's warm weather, right? Sure. The cost of living, but the causes of homelessness are multifaceted. And I personally think the major cause of homelessness is the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of family structure, growing up in poverty, growing up in abuse, growing up without a clear role model to teach you how to live your life. And then you multiply that, drug addiction. 40% of homeless people have some type of addiction. 40% of homeless people have some type of mental disorder. I've come to the conclusion 50% of the people that come into the missions around the country probably will never have the wherewithal to make it on their own. So they need government assistance, they need nonprofit assistance, they need supportive housing to go forward. There's been a movement called Housing First, fostered and pushed and funded heavily by the federal government. There's been recent studies. Washington is finally realizing millions of dollars put into Housing First doesn't work because their philosophy is all you need to do is give them an apartment or house to live in. Since Housing First has been the model from the federal government, homelessness has increased because they finally realize you have to have a restorative component to change homelessness. You give them a house, great, but they still don't have the skills. They don't have the spiritual, mental, or emotional mindset to change the way they live. They need education. They need recovery. They need mental health help. They need life coaching. And the federal government has finally realized that, and they've come now and they're asking the missions to help them. For instance, in Tacoma, Washington, there's a big homeless population there. I was the interim director there for 6 months. Big homeless problem like Seattle. It's a sister city of Seattle. So they put up a camp, fenced it, put up platforms, bought tents, put in satellites, hired a city employee to monitor it. At the end of the year, they couldn't find one homeless person that had come out of homeless. And they said, we've wasted $1.5 million. They called up the Tacoma Rescue Mission, called the executive director in and said, can you help us? We're going to give you $1.5 million to help build a new shelter for women and children, which they're in the process of doing now. It's going to open up in April. So basically, the cities are coming back to the missions and realizing, even though you're gospel preaching, you're evangelical, we see you have learned over the last 100 years how to deal with homelessness and how to make it successful.
So in a lot of ways, you know, when people looked at a mission, they go, well, that's just for some down and outers. But they really were helping an element in society that nobody else knew how to help.
People on the lowest rung that had no place to go, had no hope. They've exhausted every family safety net they've had, every social safety net they've had. They had no hope. And because the missions want homeless people to come in, we don't want to hide them. We want them to come in so we can help them.
I imagine there are some great stories of people who have come in for help and they've rebuilt their lives from the ashes.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that is a testimony in and of itself that
absolutely.
The gospel works.
The gospel works, but it's not a flash in the pan. You need to have the resources and time. Figure an addict, let's say a 35-year-old woman addict's been living on the streets for 10 years, comes in and says, I'm sick of of my life. Can you help me? And she starts feeling safe and comfortable and cared for in a facility where she has food, shelter, clothing, people loving on her, praying with her, helping her give some direction in life for long-term housing, for some vocational training. All of a sudden, yeah, I want that. I want to change my life. And she gives her heart to Christ, becomes a new believer. It doesn't mean she has every tool to rebuild her life. It's a long-term thing.
Ken, you've been doing this a long time. I remember when you and I first met, you were doing a street mission in downtown Minneapolis. You were also, for many years, the CEO or executive director of the Union Gospel Mission in St. Paul. What have you learned from all of that? What has God taught you about working with the marginalized?
I think the fact that everywhere we look, there's tremendous crisis in our culture. Not only the long-term homeless, but 40% of homeless people today are women with kids and families with children. And the people that are homeless, the marginalized, are brothers and sisters, our cousins, our aunts and uncles, our former spouses. You and I, Larry, and any successful person out there could be in the same boat if you're hit with the wrong choices and the wrong circumstances in life. And God is at work organically and powerfully in every community. For instance, there are 5 new missions in the state of Wisconsin. 4 of them are in small rural communities.
Really? Wow.
And I went out and visited them last year. And they started from a man or a woman that saw homelessness and addiction ruining lives in their small communities and used the church, bought a house, reconverted it, and just started welcoming the homeless and addicted in. So it's all around us. In fact, John Ashman recently, 4 years, wrote a book called The Invisible Neighbor, because they're in our community everywhere. Young people sleeping, surfing from couch to couch because they've dropped out. Maybe the parents have kicked them out because of drug habits, because of sexuality orientation. Family breaks up, no place to go. So the need's everywhere, Larry, and God is still at work in a powerful way. It takes us, the average believer, to take the gospel seriously and not sit in a church and do nothing. Let's get to work.
That's a great sermon.
Yeah, it really is. And it doesn't take a lot. Loving people. I used to always say at the Chapel of Hope Mission, a warm welcome to all. And when I was a director at the Union Gospel Mission, I used to preach to my staff all the time. Everybody's made in the image and likeness of God, and it's our job to try to restore that image in somebody that has no image left. I remember one time I was in the men's night chapel, and end of the service, there were probably 75, 80 guys in there looking for a bed, and they were doing the lottery system. You know, you have to put your name in because there's only a certain amount of beds. And there was a very large homeless guy. It was the winter time. He had several layers of clothes on, you know, and he had a couple bags he was toting, and he had his old dirty pillow. And he got in line and was going up to get his lottery ticket to get a bed, and he was hugging this pillow and hauling all this stuff. I just couldn't help think, okay, inside that hardcore, dirty, homeless guy with all that stuff he's lugging is a little boy going up with his pillow, wanting somebody to put him to bed. Think about that for a minute. You know, the hurt heart inside, the destroyed human being inside that needs somebody to care for him. And isn't that the mission Jesus gives us?
It is.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so thankful, Ken, for the gospel missions that are out there, ministries that are working with people who are marginalized and often forgotten, and they're coming into a place where they're feeling loved and cared for, and many are coming to Christ. I am so thankful for that. Thanks for coming in today, Ken.
Thank you for joining us today. Every Friday, we bring you this podcast with interviews with people who are challenging the status quo of Christianity and challenging the cultural norms of our day. Please help us get the word out by sharing the link to this podcast with your online friends and family. Our website also contains other podcasters who are part of the City Sites network of communicators, all sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Our website is citysitesurbanmedia.com.
This is the City Sites Podcast Network.